Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to present our work. First, this disclosure, I'll let you read that. And then a disclaimer. I will not be speaking about gene-based therapies, so you won't hurt my feelings if you decide to take an early break. Feel free. I'm going to give you in the next couple of minutes just a little background about cystic fibrosis and then kind of focus on what we've done in the post-marketing space. Many of you know this. CF is an autosomal recessive disease. About 1,000 new cases in the U.S. each year, about 35,000 patients in the U.S., 100,000 worldwide. The most common life-shortening inherited disease of Caucasians. And it's a complex multi-system disease with a majority of deaths due to lung disease, and thus pulmonologists involved like myself. We have a care center network across the country that was started in the early 60s. This was to aggregate patients together to improve care and then eventually to do research. Initially built out in children's hospitals and pediatric programs, and over the last 20 or so years, the mirror image on the adult care side. And so you can see now 133 centers across the U.S. comprised of 126 pediatric programs, 118 adult, and affiliates, typically in smaller metro areas, non-academic sites. I was at the University of Utah on the adult side. I had a pediatric counterpart, and we had a couple of affiliates up in Idaho. The CF Foundation Patient Registry was started into the mid to late 60s. And this was started by Warren Warwick, a grant from the foundation, and then moved into the foundation in the early to mid 80s. This is a report that we had in our office from 1969. It's in, some of you with gray hair may remember science projects that you did. You typed it up, you punched the holes, and you put it in these little binders. That was the registry report in 1969. The sort of the modern era of our registry started in 2003 when we moved to a web-based platform, and then we subsequently moved to another platform in 2010. CF Foundation Registry we consider as one of our crown jewels. We use it for multiple purposes, and I won't go through all of those. I'll just mention a couple and then focus on the post-marketing work. We produce annual reports, a highlights report, risk-adjusted data on all of our centers that we post on our website, and this annual data report, it's about 80 pages long. We distribute it to our program and center directors each year at our annual meeting. In fact, that was about 2 weeks ago. And then we post it on our website for all to see. It's pretty dense, a lot of data in there. If the centers can get the data in quickly, we can download it. We download the data each night, clean and process it, get it back out to them through a web-based application, which we call CF Smart Reports. They're patient summary reports. This is an individual patient summary report, often used for pre-visit planning. They're population management reports. They're clinical trial eligibility reports. So this is really bringing the registry data back to point of care, and the clinicians find it very helpful. So I'll focus on that middle topic there, post-marketing. I'm just going to give you a few examples of post-marketing studies that we've supported pharma in doing, and I'll go over three. First, the FDA requirements or commitments. One was issued after reformulated pancreatic enzymes. About 90% of the population need these enzymes because they have pancreatic insufficiency. And there's a rare complication called fibrosing colonopathy. These enzymes were reformulated, much more rigorous methodology in developing them. The FDA mandated this 10-year observational study. Multiple sponsors needed to meet this requirement The second was a 5-year prospective observational study to assess the risk of antibiotic resistance for a new inhaled antibiotic. And then lastly, a prospective observational study to assess the safety of a new CFTR modulator. So these first two commitments, I'll talk about the trials that we developed in collaboration with pharma. And the first was that Fibrosing colonopathy study. And this was a fairly straightforward study, other than there were multiple sponsors, and trying to harmonize all of them on one protocol was the real challenge. And much of my gray hair is derived from trying to bring all those sponsors together. And then the second was an inhaled antibiotic study. And I'll tell you just a little bit about each of these studies. This colonopathy study, I mentioned this rare complication. So we needed a numerator and a denominator to calculate the actual incidence. So anonymized registry patients at participating sites, and about 95% of our care centers participated, served as the denominator. This required no separate consent, so it made the study much easier. And then a separate study developed to collect additional data on suspected colonopathy cases. This was an IRB-approved, patient-consented study. Suspected cases were adjudicated by an expert panel, and then the positive cases served as the numerator. So this simple diagram, the FC cases divided by the registry population at participating sites to calculate an incidence. And I think we're in the 6th year of this study now. The inhaled antibiotic study was an IRB-approved, patient-consented study. Just a subset of our centers participated, about 20 or 25. The patient selection criteria were set so as to enrich for treatment with inhaled antibiotics, including the drug being studied. The sponsor set up a central lab to collect annual respiratory cultures and a standardized approach to the specimens, and these were linked to clinical outcomes in our registry. So again, a simple diagram, the foundation registry, a subset of the patients that were in the sponsor's study. They provided the microbiology data, we provided the clinical data, an emerged data set, and the analyses were done. The FDA mandated testing for antibiotic susceptibility, but the sponsor and we agreed that it was also important to track the clinical outcomes. So that's the protocol that was submitted and approved by the FDA. And in fact, as expected, resistance patterns went up, but it had no impact on clinical outcomes. And that study is being prepared for publication now, a 5-year study that just ended about 6 months ago. So this final study, I'll talk a little bit more detail about this CFTR modulator, an observational study to evaluate the long-term safety of ivacaftor in patients with cystic fibrosis. This is sometimes referred to as a PASS study, post-authorization safety study. But first, a little bit of background, and many of you are aware of this, that there have been major scientific breakthroughs that have led to transformational therapies. And to the left is Danny looking back at a picture of himself on the cover of the journal Science when he was a young toddler. This is, I think it was September of 1989 when this was published, the CFTR gene and the major mutation. This was a major bottleneck, a tremendous science that followed, eventually leading to these transformational therapies. This was the first one, Kalydeco, impacting just a minority, 5 to 10% of the population. Now 3 subsequent drugs, including one that was just approved recently, and I'll come back to that in just a couple minutes. So this first CFTR modulator therapy on ivacaftor, which was approved in 2012, used existing registry data. It was anonymized and compared to a propensity-matched comparator group. And there are some issues with this design that I won't go into, but it's looking at all the outcomes that we collected in the registry, and I've mentioned some of those here. An interim analysis of that data was recently published in Thorax, and this combined data from the U.S. registry and the UK registry, and I'll show you just some of the results from the U.S. registry. And it essentially confirmed effectiveness in the clinical space as compared to what was shown in the phase 3 clinical trials. Hospitalizations and pulmonary exacerbations in blue, the ivacaftor treated patients, in gray, the comparator group, and you can see decreases in hospitalizations and exacerbations, death and need for organ transplantation. Again, favorable outcomes shown here. And then lung function changes over time. The blue line, lung function was maintained, and the gray line showed the comparator group some decline over this 3 or 4 year time period. These results were mirrored in the UK registry. So this is where we are now with CFTR modulators and cystic fibrosis. There are, as mentioned, 4 FDA-approved drugs, and this shows in gray those with no modulator eligibility by virtue of their genotype. In yellow, that's the Kalydeco that I've talked a little bit about, and in that dark blue is Orkambi or Symdeko. These are CFTR modulators not nearly as effective as ivacaftor, and we are following those in our registry along with the pharmaceutical sponsor. The important point to make is only about 6% of those treated in this entire population on a highly effective drug. And now in 5 years, with this recent approval of Trikafta, we're estimating when this drug, currently approved for 12 and above, when it moves down to infancy, it will cover about 90 to 91% of the population. Small percentage, 4 to 5%, will still derive the same benefit just from the Kalydeco. This has long-term implications for us that may be analogous to the topic at hand. When this therapy gets down to those in infancy, we suspect that they may have, if they continue to take the drug religiously, they may have a normal life expectancy and no complications of CF. So how do we follow these folks? We hope to keep them in our care centers and at least periodically followed up, maybe on an annual basis. So when I was thinking about our key success factors in developing this post-marketing research program that we've developed, I think first and foremost was that we had a strong infrastructure in place back to the visionary leaders in our community in the 1960s to develop a care center network to aggregate these patients, improve care, make research possible. They put a patient registry in place to follow initially the natural history of the disease and now to follow the impact of these therapies. We had experienced partners, including our registry vendor, who helped us learn about this post-marketing space. We had ongoing relationships with many of these pharmaceutical sponsors. They knew us, they knew of our care center network, they knew of our registry, and so it was easy to develop a business relationship with them. And we also had credibility with the FDA in terms of our registry. And that's all I wanted to cover today. Thank you for your attention.